Act 1. The Meet. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Peter's Basilica, painting the stone floor in pools of blue and gold. Alejandro Cruz sat in his usual spot, last pew, right side, watching the ceremony with the careful attention of someone trained to notice details others missed. He wasn't particularly religious anymore, though he'd been raised Catholic. These weekly visits were more habit than faith, a ritual his grandmother had instilled in him before she disappeared all those years ago. Near the altar, a group of nuns led the congregation in prayer. One voice rose above the others, clear and beautiful, cutting through the heavy incense-filled air. Alejandro found himself looking toward the sound. Sister Isabella Romano stood with perfect posture, her hands clasped, her voice steady, but something seemed off. Her eyes kept scanning the crowd, not in peaceful contemplation, but with the alertness of someone expecting danger. During communion, their eyes met for just 3 seconds. Her expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened with what looked like recognition, though they'd never spoken. Fear flashed across her face, raw and unguarded, before she quickly looked away. Alejandro felt his breath catch, not because of beauty hidden beneath her habit, but because of that look. He'd spent his career studying history, reading ancient texts, understanding human nature through artifacts and documents. That look told him a story he couldn't yet read. 2 days later, Alejandro received an unusual summons to the Vatican's secret archives. Cardinal Torretta, a high-ranking church official, needed an expert historian to catalog recently discovered 16th century documents. The request was urgent but vague, no details about what made these documents special or why the sudden rush. When Alejandro arrived at the archives, Sister Isabella was already there. The cardinal explained she would serve as his Vatican liaison to maintain propriety. The church had rules about men and women working alone together, even in dusty archives filled with centuries-old papers. Their first impressions clashed immediately. Alejandro saw a sheltered nun who would slow down his work with constant prayer breaks and lack of academic training. Isabella saw an arrogant scholar who would ask too many questions and disturb things better left alone. Both were wrong about each other, but neither knew it yet. The archives were vast, rows of wooden shelves stretching into shadows, filled with leather-bound books and yellowed manuscripts. They worked in awkward silence, Isabella handing him documents while he examined them with practiced care. Hours passed with only the scratch of his pen and the whisper of turning pages. Then, Alejandro found something that changed everything. Hidden among routine church records was a leather-bound journal with a symbol burned into its cover, a scarlet cross, unlike any he'd seen in his 15 years of Vatican research. The cross was elaborate, with strange flourishes at each point, almost like claws. He checked his references. Nothing. This symbol wasn't in any official Vatican registry. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up. Isabella's hands trembled when she saw it. Not a small shake. Her whole body seemed to tense. I don't know," she said quickly. "We should lock it away and report it to the cardinal." Her reaction was too strong, too immediate. Alejandro had interviewed hundreds of people during his research. He could read lies as easily as he read Latin. "You've seen this symbol before," he said quietly. "No." She reached for the journal, but he pulled it back. "Sister, I've made a career of reading truth in old documents. I can read it in people too. You know what this is." She looked toward the door, then back at him, her face pale. "Please, just put it back. Pretend you never saw it." Before he could respond, she gathered her things quickly, too quickly. As she hurried toward the exit, a small photograph slipped from inside her prayer book and fluttered to the floor. Alejandro picked it up. The image showed a young girl, maybe 12 years old, standing with a bearded man in front of a small church. The man's hand rested on her shoulder, both of them smiling. And there, carved above the church door, was the same scarlet cross symbol from the journal. "That's mine!" Isabella snatched the photo from his hand, tears suddenly filling her eyes. She clutched it to her chest like something precious and painful all at once. "Sister Isabella, if you value your life, forget everything you saw today." Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "Everything. Then she was gone, leaving Alejandro alone in the archives with the journal in his hands and more questions than answers. He looked down at the scarlet cross on the cover, running his finger over the burned leather. Above him, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A security camera pointed directly at their workspace. Fresh, recently installed. Why would anyone need surveillance in an archive of centuries-old documents? His phone buzzed. A message from Cardinal Torretta. Progress report by end of week. No detail too small. Alejandro looked at the journal, then at the camera, then at the door where Isabella had fled in fear. His academic instincts screamed that he'd just stumbled onto something significant. But the way Isabella had looked at that photograph, the terror mixed with grief, told him this wasn't just another historical mystery. This was personal. This was dangerous. This was something people had died to keep secret. He should lock the journal away and forget about it, just as Isabella had begged. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Instead, Alejandro tucked the journal into his bag and began making notes. He'd spent his life searching the past for answers about his grandmother, who'd vanished without a trace during political violence in Mexico. He knew what it looked like when powerful people made inconvenient witnesses disappear. He recognized that fear in Isabella's eyes because he'd seen it in his own mirror for years. Whatever this scarlet cross represented, it had scared a nun badly enough that she'd broken her composure completely. And something told him that if he wanted real answers, he'd need to see her again. The question was whether she'd let him close enough to find them, or if she'd run again, taking her secrets with her into the shadows. Act 2. The Pursuit. Alejandro knew he was breaking rules. The cardinal had given him specific instructions about which documents to catalog, and the Scarlet Cross Journal wasn't on that list, but he'd never been good at following orders when something interesting appeared. 3 nights after finding the journal, he returned to the archives well past midnight, when the halls were empty and quiet. The journal was written in Old Italian mixed with Latin, both languages he read fluently. As he worked through the pages, a pattern emerged. The Scarlet Cross appeared again and again, spanning 400 years of documents he wasn't supposed to have access to. Each time it appeared, it connected to powerful families, unexplained deaths, and suspicious events around papal elections. This wasn't random. This was evidence of something organized, something that had survived centuries. "You're going to get yourself killed," Alejandro jumped. Isabella stood in the doorway, still in her habit, her face stern in the dim lamplight. How long had she been watching? "I could report you," she continued, stepping inside. "You're working on unauthorized materials after hours. That's grounds for immediate dismissal and possibly criminal charges." "But you won't." He kept his voice calm, though his heart pounded. "And why wouldn't I?" "Because you want to know what's in here as much as I do." He gestured to the journal. "Maybe more." Isabella's jaw tightened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she crossed to the door, checked the hallway, and locked them inside. From beneath her robes, she produced a key he'd never seen before. "If you're going to be reckless," she said quietly, "at least be thorough." She walked to a section of shelving that looked like all the others and pressed on a particular spine. A small door clicked open, revealing a cramped passageway. "There's a restricted archive. Documents the Vatican keeps separate. If your Scarlet Cross is as old as you think, there might be more." They worked in tense silence for the next few hours. Isabella knew the filing system better than any librarian. She'd pull documents and slide them across the table to him with barely a word. He'd scan them, make notes, and move to the next. They communicated through margin notes and pointed questions, developing a rhythm without quite becoming partners. She never answered his personal questions. He learned to respect her boundaries, though it took effort. A week later, following clues from the journal, Alejandro suggested something crazy. "There's a catacomb outside Rome, Domitilla. The Scarlet Cross symbol appears in 3rd century Christian art there. We should see it." "That's not part of our assignment," Isabella said. "I know. It would be unauthorized." "I know. We could both be in serious trouble." "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, "Tomorrow. Dawn. Tell no one." The catacombs of Domitilla stretched beneath the earth like a stone maze. Their flashlight beams cut through centuries of darkness, illuminating ancient bones and faded frescoes. Away from the Vatican, from the watching cameras and careful roles they played, something shifted between them. In the narrow tunnel, Isabella removed her veil. The practical reason was the heat and dust, but Alejandro suspected something else. He saw her face fully for the first time, younger than he'd thought, maybe 28 to his 34. Beautiful in an understated way, with dark hair tied back and eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Why did you become a historian?" she asked as they walked deeper into the tunnels. He hadn't expected the question. "My grandmother," he said finally. "She disappeared in Mexico in 1985, political violence. Men came to her house and she was just gone. No body, no trial, no answers. Just gone." He ran his hand along the ancient wall. "I searched the past because I couldn't fix the present. At least with history, the truth is already there, waiting to be found. You just have to look hard enough." Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Sometimes the past hunts us instead of the other way around." "What do you mean?" She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away when their shoulders brushed in the narrow passage either. They found the hidden chamber an hour later, a small room sealed off from the main tunnels, its entrance concealed behind what looked like natural rock. Inside, a fresco covered one wall, its colors still vibrant after 1,700 years. A woman in red robe stood over a scarlet cross, surrounded by names written in careful Latin script. Alejandro recognized two names immediately: cardinals who died mysteriously in 1978 during the year of 3 popes, when the church had gone through 3 different leaders in just a few months. Historians still debated what really happened that year. "My father is on this wall." Isabella's voice was so quiet, he almost missed it. She pointed to a faded name near the bottom: Giovanni Romano, 1994. Her father. Alejandro had assumed Isabella grew up in the church, raised by religious parents who guided her to this life. But looking at the dates, doing the math, he realized she would have been just a child when that name was carved. Isabella sank to the ground, her back against the wall, and started to cry. Not delicate tears, but deep shaking sobs that came from somewhere dark and long buried. Alejandro didn't touch her. He sensed that contact would shatter whatever fragile control she was maintaining. Instead, he sat beside her in the darkness and waited. Finally, she spoke. "My father worked as an accountant for the Vatican. Regular job, boring spreadsheets, nothing exciting. But he found something. Irregularities in the finances, money moving in strange patterns. He tried to report it through proper channels." She wiped her face roughly. "They said he ran away, stole money and abandoned his family. Everyone believed it. My mother died a year later from the shame. But I saw them, Alejandro. I was 12 years old, and I saw the men come to our house. I saw them take him, and they all wore rings with a scarlet cross." Alejandro felt his chest tighten. "Isabella. I became a nun because it was the only way to get inside the Vatican, to search for proof, to find out who those men were, to make them pay for what they took from me." She looked at him, her eyes red but fierce. "Everyone thinks I'm devoted to God, but I'm devoted to revenge." They sat together in that ancient chamber for 3 hours. She talked about her father, how he'd read her bedtime stories, how he'd taught her to ride a bike, how he'd promised to take her to Venice someday but never got the chance. She talked about the years after he disappeared, how she'd been shuffled between relatives who didn't want her, how she'd joined the church not for peace, but for access. "You're the first person who's believed me," she said finally. "Everyone else thinks I'm crazy or lying or just a traumatized child who can't accept that her father was a thief." "I believe you," Alejandro said simply, "because I know what it's like when someone you love vanishes and the world pretends it didn't matter. My grandmother was just another casualty, another statistic. Nobody cared enough to find the truth." He gestured to the wall of names. "But these people cared enough to remember. This wall is evidence. Your father's name is here because he mattered, because what happened to him was wrong." Isabella looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with something else, something warmer and more dangerous. Neither of them spoke on the drive back to Rome. But when they parted at the Vatican gates, Isabella touched his hand briefly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening, for believing, for not treating me like I'm broken." "You're not broken," Alejandro said. "You're focused." She smiled then, a real smile, and walked through the gates. Alejandro watched her go, realizing with a strange mixture of excitement and fear that they'd crossed a line tonight. This wasn't just research anymore. This was personal. This was dangerous. This was something worth risking everything for. And he suspected Isabella felt exactly the same way. Act 3. The complication. The architectural plans were old, drawn in 1506 by some forgotten Vatican engineer. Alejandro found them buried in a collection of building documents, filed under routine maintenance records. Most historians would have missed them entirely. But Alejandro had learned to look for what shouldn't be there, the anomalies, the gaps, the careful omissions. These plans showed a sealed chamber directly beneath the Sistine Chapel, built during the Renaissance and never officially opened. No explanation for its purpose, no record of what it contained, just empty space on official documents where something should be. "We need to get in there," he told Isabella. They were in the archives again, working late, speaking in whispers even though they were alone. The surveillance camera watched them constantly now, and they'd learned to have important conversations in the blind spots it created. "That's impossible," Isabella said. "Access beneath the Sistine Chapel requires cardinal-level approval, multiple signatures, security clearances we don't have. But we have legitimate research credentials. And you have insider knowledge. We tell them we need to assess structural integrity, check for damage from ground settling. It's boring enough to be believable." Isabella bit her lip, thinking, "It's risky. Everything we've done is risky. This is different. If we're wrong about what's down there, we'll just look like fools. But if we're right..." She trailed off, but he understood. If they were right, they'd be confirming the existence of something powerful people had hidden for 5 centuries. 3 days later, armed with official permissions and accompanied by a disinterested Vatican engineer, they descended into the sealed chamber. The entrance was hidden behind what looked like a normal wall, opened only with a specific key the engineer produced with obvious boredom. 15 minutes, he told them. "That's all the time you get. And touch nothing." The chamber was perfectly circular, about 30 feet across. 12 marble boxes, coffins really, arranged in a ring around a scarlet cross inlaid in gold at the center of the floor. Each box bore a name and date, founders of whatever organization this represented. But it wasn't the founders that made Isabella gasp. Around the coffins, displayed in glass cases like museum exhibits, were hundreds of personal items: wedding rings, eyeglasses, children's toys, a woman's scarf, a man's pocket watch, each item labeled with a name and date. This wasn't a tomb. This was a trophy room. These were possessions taken from people who disappeared, people who'd been made to vanish just like Isabella's father, just like Alejandro's grandmother. "Holy God," the engineer whispered, his boredom evaporating. "What is this place?" Alejandro was already taking photographs, his hands shaking. Isabella moved through the space like a ghost, reading names, touching glass cases with her fingertips. Then she stopped. Her hand pressed against one case, and she made a sound like she'd been punched. Inside was a pocket watch, gold, inscribed. The label read, "Giovanni Romano, 1994, Isabella." Opened the case. The engineer protested, but she ignored him and took the watch. She held it to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. Alejandro wanted to comfort her, but knew this moment was hers alone. Instead, he kept photographing, documenting everything. Whatever happened next, they'd have evidence. That night, in a hidden chapel deep in the Vatican where Alejandro had learned no cameras reached, they met to process what they'd found. Isabella still held her father's watch, turning it over and over in her hands like a prayer. "We have proof now," Alejandro said. "Real, physical evidence. We can take this to authorities outside the Vatican." "Alejandro!" Isabella looked up at him, her eyes red but clear. "You don't understand how powerful they are. The Scarlet Dominion, that's what the journal called them. They're not just in the church, they're in governments, corporations, law enforcement. If they've survived 500 years, it's because they control the systems meant to stop them." "Then what do we do?" She stood, setting the watch down carefully on the altar. "I don't know. but I know we can't trust anyone. And I know," she stepped closer to him, "I know that you're the bravest person I've met. Or the most foolish, I can't decide which." "Definitely foolish," he said, trying to smile. She touched his face then, her fingertips gentle against his cheek. "You're the first person who's treated this like it matters, like I matter." "You do matter," Alejandro said, "more than you know." The kiss happened without planning, without thought. Isabella pulled him close and kissed him with desperate hunger, like she'd been starving and he was sustenance. He responded instantly, his hands finding her waist, pulling her against him. For 10 seconds, they weren't a historian and a nun, weren't investigators on a dangerous path. They were just two people who'd found something real in a world of secrets and lies. Then, Isabella pulled away, horror flooding her face. No, I can't. I'm bound to God. I took vows." "Did you?" Alejandro's voice came out sharper than he intended. "Did you take vows for faith, or did you take them to get access? Are you devoted to God, or are you hiding behind him?" The slap came fast and hard, snapping his head to the side. Isabella's hand shook as she pulled it back. "Don't you dare judge me. You don't know what I've sacrificed. I'm not judging. I'm asking, because I need to know if what I feel is real or if it's just proximity and adrenaline." He touched his reddening cheek. "I need to know if you're really a nun who can't love me, or if you're a woman who's afraid to." Isabella's face crumpled. Without another word, she grabbed the watch and ran. Alejandro didn't follow. He'd pushed too hard, asked too much. But the question remained, hanging in the incense-scented air. What were they to each other? And what were they willing to risk to find out? The next day, Cardinal Torretta summoned Alejandro to his office. The cardinal's quarters were ornate, gold fixtures, ancient artwork, furniture that cost more than most people's homes. Torretta sat behind a massive desk, his fingers steepled, a slight smile on his face. "Dr. Cruz, how goes the cataloging?" "Well, Your Eminence, I'm making good progress. Have you found anything unusual?" The cardinal's eyes flicked down to his own hand, where a ring glinted. A scarlet cross ring. Alejandro's blood went cold, but he kept his face neutral. Years of academic presentations had taught him to hide reactions. Nothing unexpected. 16th century documents are always fascinating, but these are fairly routine church records. "I see." The cardinal studied him. "And Sister Isabella? She's been helpful?" "Very professional, yes." Good. Torretta leaned back. "You know, Dr. Cruz, the Vatican values discretion. We have many secrets, not because we're hiding anything sinful, you understand, but because some knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands. The Church has survived 2,000 years by understanding when to reveal truth and when to protect people from it." It wasn't quite a threat, but it was definitely a warning. "I understand, Your Eminence." "I'm glad." Torretta smiled wider. "You're a smart man. I hope you'll continue to be smart." That evening, Isabella came to Alejandro's apartment, a small place he rented outside Vatican grounds. It was the first time she'd left the Vatican walls without official permission in 3 years. "I'm here to tell you we have to stop," she said before he could even invite her in. She stood in the doorway, still wearing her habit, looking exhausted. "Mother Superior called me in today. Someone filed a complaint, anonymous, saying I've been spending inappropriate time with you. I've been given an ultimatum. Request your removal from the project, or face expulsion from the order." "So request my removal," Alejandro said. "Your safety is more important than this project." "No, you don't understand. If they expel me, I lose access completely. Everything I've worked for." "Isabella." He gently pulled her inside and closed the door. "Look at this." He showed her his computer screen, financial records he'd managed to photograph in the chamber. Names, numbers, transactions. The Scarlet Dominion's reach was vast. Current world leaders, tech billionaires, pharmaceutical companies, money flowing through networks that touched every major institution. "Your father found this in 1994, Alejandro said quietly. "He tried to expose it, and they killed him. If we stop now, he died for nothing. All those people whose belongings are in that chamber, they all died for nothing. But if we keep going, if we expose this, And if we keep going, we die too, Isabella interrupted, her voice breaking. Don't you see? They're already warning us. First the cardinal's questions, now this complaint. They're telling us to stop before they make us stop permanently. I'm not afraid of them. Well, I am, she was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I'm terrified, Alejandro. I've already lost my father, my mother, my entire childhood. I can't lose anyone else to this. I can't lose you, not even you, especially not you. Alejandro felt his chest tighten. So what do you want me to do? Stop, just stop, walk away, live your life, please. He looked at her, this brilliant, broken, brave woman who'd spent years searching for justice and was now begging him to abandon the search. He understood her fear. He felt it too. But he also felt something else, an obligation to the names on that wall, to the victims who'd been erased from history. He made the wrong choice. I can't, he said. I'm sorry, Isabella, but I'm doing this with or without you. I have to. Her face went blank, the look of someone who'd just had their worst fear confirmed. Then you're doing it without me. She left. He let her go, believing that righteousness justified the sacrifice, that exposing the truth was worth losing her. He wouldn't realize until much later how badly he'd miscalculated and how much that mistake would cost them both. Act 4. The crisis. Alejandro knew breaking into the Vatican's modern administrative offices was stupid. He knew it was dangerous. He knew he should stop, regroup, find a safer way forward. But anger and righteousness made him reckless. He'd spent 2 weeks without Isabella, and the silence felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. So he did something foolish. He decided to finish the job himself. The administrative building was separate from the historical archives, modern, efficient, filled with computers instead of ancient manuscripts. Security was tighter, but Alejandro had memorized the guard rotations, had obtained, through methods he preferred not to examine too closely, a maintenance access card. He got inside. He found the financial office. He began photographing documents that proved what the Scarlet Dominion really was, an organized criminal network that had embedded itself in the church 5 centuries ago and grown like a cancer, spreading into every institution that touched power. He was photographing the last file when the lights came on. But the men who entered weren't regular Vatican security guards. They wore expensive suits, moved with military precision, and each wore a scarlet crosspin on their lapel. Dr. Cruz, one of them, smiled without warmth. You should have listened to the warnings. They took him deep underground, but not to the historical chamber he'd discovered with Isabella. This was something else, modern, cold, brutally functional, a room designed not for history, but for making people disappear from it. Cardinal Toretta was there, flanked by men in business suits who looked like they'd stepped out of corporate boardrooms. The scarlet crosspins on their lapels caught the harsh fluorescent light. You've been very persistent, Dr. Cruz. Toretta's friendly mask was gone now. We've monitored everything. Your research, your photographs, your time with Sister Isabella. We let you continue because we needed to know how much you'd learned and who you might have told. You killed her father, Alejandro said. You killed hundreds of people, thousands probably, over 500 years. We maintained order, Toretta corrected. The world needs structure, Dr. Cruz. It needs guidance. The Scarlet Dominion has provided that guidance for centuries. We've prevented chaos, maintained stability, ensured that the right people held power. Your narrow perspective sees murder, we see necessity. That's insane. No, Toretta leaned forward. Insanity is believing truth matters more than order. You and Sister Isabella, or should I say, Isabella Romano, the accountant's daughter who infiltrated our church, you both made that mistake. Alejandro's heart stopped. What? Oh yes. We've known who she was from the beginning. Did you really think a traumatized 12-year-old could grow up and slip into the Vatican unnoticed? We let her in. We watched her search. We used her to find out if Giovanni Romano had told anyone else about what he discovered. Fortunately, he was a loyal man who tried to work within the system. That made him easy to eliminate. The room spun. Isabella's years of investigation, her careful planning, it had all been monitored from the start. They'd known everything. What are you going to do with me? Alejandro asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "You're going to have an unfortunate accident," one of the suited men said. "Mexican authorities will find your body in Cancun. Drug violence is so common there, very tragic. Your family will grieve, and the world will move on." They grabbed him, started moving him toward a waiting van. Alejandro struggled, but they were professionals, trained for this. He thought of his grandmother, who'd probably faced similar men in her final moments. He thought of Isabella, whose father had definitely faced them. And he thought about how stupid he'd been to believe academic credentials and good intentions could protect him from people who'd been killing for 5 centuries. Then everything exploded into chaos. "Freeze! Vatican police! Hands where we can see them!" Armed officers flooded the room. Real Vatican police this time, not the Scarlet Dominion's private security. With them came a woman Alejandro didn't recognize, wearing an Interpol jacket. And at the front, wearing civilian clothes with a bulletproof vest over them, was Isabella. But not Isabella as he knew her. No habit, no gentle deference, no hiding. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd been in control all along, her voice sharp and commanding as she directed the operation. Within minutes, Toretta and his associates were in handcuffs. Isabella stood over the cardinal, her face cold. "Giovanni Romano was my father. I've spent 3 years building this case. Every conversation, every document, every financial transaction, recorded and submitted to Interpol. You're finished." "Isabella?" Alejandro's voice came out confused, hurt. What is this?" She turned to him, and for a moment her mask cracked. He saw genuine pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me explain." But the Interpol agent intervened, pulling Alejandro aside. "Dr. Cruz, you're safe now. We need your statement about tonight's events." Alejandro let them lead him away, looking back at Isabella, or whoever she really was. She watched him go, her hand reaching out slightly, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something. But no words came. Hours later, in a safe house secured by Vatican police, Alejandro finally got the full truth. The Interpol agent, Special Agent Maria Santos, explained everything with clinical efficiency. "Isabella Romano approached us 3 years ago with evidence about her father's murder. We verified her claims and offered her a chance to go undercover. She wasn't actually ordained as a nun. It was a cover identity we created. She's been working as an intelligence operative, gathering evidence against the Scarlet Dominion." Everything was fake? Alejandro felt sick. Her faith, her vows, her entire identity. "Her father's murder was real," Agent Santos said. "Her grief was real. Her determination to see justice done was real. As for the rest," she shrugged, "you'd have to ask her." They let him see Isabella that evening. She'd changed clothes, jeans and a simple shirt, her hair down, looking like a completely different person from the nun he'd known. They sat in a plain interview room with a guard outside the door, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Alejandro broke the silence. "Was anything real? Your name, your life, your faith? Was any of it true?" "My father's murder was real," Isabella's voice cracked. "My fear was real. Everything I felt in those tunnels, in that chapel, that was real. The only lie was the costume." "And us?" Alejandro's voice shook. "Was that real or was that tactical? Did they tell you to get close to me? Was I just another part of the investigation?" Isabella stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed lying to you? I've been undercover for 3 years, Alejandro. 3 years of pretending to be someone else, of watching every word, every gesture, every moment. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Then why not tell me the truth?" "Because I couldn't risk the operation. Because if you'd known, you might have changed how you acted around me, and they were watching us constantly. Because..." She stopped, her hands shaking. "Because I was scared that if you knew the real me, you wouldn't want me anymore." "The real you?" Alejandro laughed bitterly. "I don't even know who that is. The nun was fake. So who are you, Isabella? Or is that even your real name?" "It's my name," she said quietly. "Isabella Romano. That part was always true. But you're right. I don't know who I am beyond that. I've been so many different people for so long that I can't tell what's performance and what's me anymore. I don't know what I really believe, what I really want, who I'd be without a mission to complete." She sat back down, her face in her hands. "I loved you in that tomb. I loved you in that chapel. I love you now." That was never a lie. But I can't prove it to you. I can't prove it to myself. How do you separate real emotions from a role you've been playing for years? Alejandro looked at this woman, strong, broken, honest, and false all at once. Part of him wanted to hold her, to tell her it didn't matter, that they'd figure it out together. But another part, the part that felt betrayed and used and stupid, wanted to walk away and never look back. I need time, he said finally. I need to think. I understand, Isabella whispered. Take all the time you need. But time wouldn't help the case. The Scarlet Dominion's lawyers were already at work. Without physical access to the sealed chamber, which the Vatican now claimed didn't exist, without corroborating witnesses whom the Dominion had spent centuries learning how to silence, the evidence was circumstantial. Toretta and his associates might walk free. They're going to get away with it, Isabella told Alejandro a week later. They'd met for coffee at her request, sitting in a public cafe like strangers, making awkward conversation. The case is falling apart. Their money, their connections, it's all working exactly as it has for 500 years. So what do? I testify. I provide everything I found. And then, she stirred her coffee without drinking it. Then I try to rebuild a life from nothing. My cover's blown. I can't go back to intelligence work. I can't go back to the Vatican. I'm 28 years old with no real identity, no career, no home. I dedicated my entire adult life to this mission, and it's going to fail anyway. Isabella, don't, she stood, leaving money on the table. I know you're trying to be kind, but you can't fix this. Nobody can. A month later, Alejandro accepted a position at Cambridge University, prestigious, well-paying, thousands of miles from Rome and everything that had happened there. He told himself it was a good career move. He told himself he was being smart, protecting himself. He didn't admit he was running. The day before his flight, Isabella came to say goodbye at the airport. She looked tired, older somehow, like the stress had aged her prematurely. I wanted to give you this, she said, handing him a small box. Inside was her father's watch, the one they'd found in the sealed chamber. Why? Alejandro asked. Because it was real, Isabella said simply. What we found, what we did. It mattered, even if it didn't end the way we hoped. I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. I'll never forget you, Alejandro said, and meant it. Isabella smiled sadly. I wish I could say the same, but I've spent so long being different people that my own memories feel like lies now. Give me time. Maybe someday I'll figure out which version of me was real, which version loved you. They all did, Alejandro said. I could tell. That was the one thing I was sure about. He walked away then, toward his gate, toward his new life, toward safety and certainty, and the kind of quiet academic work that didn't threaten powerful people. He didn't look back. If he had, he would have seen Isabella crying silently in the departure terminal, holding herself together just long enough for him to disappear from view. Sometimes walking away is the only way to survive, but survival and living aren't the same thing. Alejandro would spend the next 6 months learning that distinction. Act 5. The Resolution. 6 months passed. Alejandro threw himself into teaching and research at Cambridge, publishing papers about relatively safe historical topics. His colleagues praised his work ethic, though a few noted he seemed distracted. He told himself he was fine, that he'd moved on, that Isabella was just another closed chapter in his life story. He was a terrible liar, even to himself. October brought him back to Mexico for Day of the Dead, a tradition his family maintained despite the pain it brought. They built an altar for his grandmother, covering it with photographs, marigolds, her favorite foods. The idea was that the dead returned for one night each year, drawn by the memories and love of the living. Alejandro didn't believe in that anymore. He'd seen too much of how the powerful could make people vanish, leaving nothing but unanswered questions. But he went through the motions, because his mother asked him to, because tradition mattered even when faith didn't. A package arrived that afternoon, no return address. Inside was the pocket watch, Isabella's father's watch, and a simple note in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. I'm ready to tell the truth, all of it, if you'll listen. IR. Attached was a photograph. Isabella stood outside the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City, no habit, wearing ordinary clothes, looking directly at the camera. On the back, she'd written, "I'm here, where you began." Alejandro stared at the photo for a long time. Every rational part of his brain told him to ignore it, to stay in England, to keep his safe distance from the woman who'd lied to him for months. But his grandmother had raised him to believe something else, that some people are worth showing up for, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He caught the next flight to Mexico City. The Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe was enormous, one of the most visited Catholic sites in the world. Pilgrims came from across Latin America to see the miraculous image of the Virgin Mary, supposedly imprinted on a peasant's cloak in 1531. Alejandro had been here countless times as a child, dragged along by his devout grandmother, despite his growing skepticism. He found Isabella sitting in a pew near the back, staring up at the famous image. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair longer now, pulled back in a ponytail. She looked more real than she ever had in her nun's habit, imperfect, uncertain, beautifully human. She turned when he sat beside her. "You came." "I came." For a moment they just looked at each other, two people who'd shared something profound and painful, and still didn't quite know how to talk about it. "After you left," Isabella said quietly, "after the case started falling apart legally, I did something desperate." She took a breath. "I released everything to journalists, every photograph we took, every financial record, every piece of evidence. I gave it to 5 different news organizations across 3 continents." Alejandro felt his stomach drop. "Isabella, that's illegal." "Yes, I violated intelligence protocols, broke my confidentiality agreements, destroyed any chance I had at a normal career. But it worked." She smiled grimly. "The Vatican was forced to open the sealed chamber publicly. They couldn't deny it existed anymore, not with journalists from around the world demanding access. The Scarlet Dominion is being dismantled, not through courts, but through exposure. Their power was secrecy. Once everyone knew, they couldn't hide anymore." "What about you?" "I'm wanted by about a dozen government agencies. I can't go back to Europe. I can't work in intelligence ever again." She laughed without humor. "I destroyed my career, my safety, any chance at a normal life. But my father can rest now. All those people on that wall, they're not forgotten anymore. Their families are getting answers." "That was incredibly brave," Alejandro said. "Or incredibly stupid," Isabella countered. "I'm still not sure which." They sat in silence for a moment, then Isabella turned to him fully. "You asked me once who I really was, and I told you I didn't know. I've spent 6 months trying to answer that question. And I'm still not sure," she admitted. "For 3 years I was Sister Isabella, devoted nun. Before that I was Isabella Romano, victim and daughter. I've never just been me. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what I believe, what I want, who I'd be without a mission or a role to play." Alejandro saw the vulnerability in her face, genuine, unguarded, and made a decision. "Then figure it out," he said. "Take your time. I'll wait." Isabella blinked. "You'll wait?" "Alejandro, you don't understand what you're saying. I'm a mess. I'm legally complicated. I have no idea who I am or what I want from life. I could spend years sorting through my own confusion." "Then spend years," he interrupted gently. "I don't need you to have all the answers, Isabella. I need you to be brave enough to find them, and I want to be here while you do." "Why?" Her voice broke. "After everything I put you through, after all the lies, why would you choose that?" "Because I spent my life searching the past for answers about my grandmother," Alejandro said. "You taught me something more important, how to be present for someone's future. I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need you to have your life figured out. I just need you to be honest about the journey, and I want to be there for it." Isabella started crying, not from trauma this time, but from relief. "I loved you in that tomb. I loved you in that chapel. I love you now. That was never a lie. It was the most real thing in my entire pretend life." "I know," Alejandro said, taking her hand. "I'm a historian. I've learned to tell the difference between truth and fiction. What you felt was real, Isabella. Even if you were confused about everything else, that was real. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, just breathing together, letting the weight of 6 months apart settle into something manageable. Finally, Isabella spoke. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I," Alejandro admitted. "But I have an idea. Stay in Mexico. Give yourself a year. See a therapist. A real one, not another undercover assignment. Build an identity that isn't about revenge or missions or roles. Just be Isabella Romano, whoever that turns out to be." "And you?" "I'll go back to Rome. Finish cataloging the sealed chamber properly. Document the victims. Give names back to people who were erased from history. Your father's among them. He deserves to have his story told." "A year apart?" Isabella pulled back to look at him. "After just finding each other again?" "Not apart," Alejandro said. "We'll write letters, old-fashioned, physical, honest letters. No performances, no lies, just two people learning who they really are and sharing that process. And in 1 year, we meet back here. Same place, no roles, no missions. Just us." Isabella considered this, then nodded slowly. "And if we're different people by then? If we've grown apart instead of together?" "Then we'll know," Alejandro said, "and we'll deal with it honestly. But my guess? We're going to grow toward each other, not away. Because what we have isn't just attraction or shared trauma, it's recognition. I see you, Isabella, the real you, whoever she turns out to be, and I like what I see." She kissed him then, gentle, hopeful, free of desperation. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. 1 year, letters, then we see what happens." 1 year, he agreed. They stayed in the Basilica until it closed, talking about small things, her plans to learn guitar, his new research project, the ordinary details of lives that were finally, tentatively, their own. When they parted at the entrance, Isabella squeezed his hand once, hard, then walked away into the Mexico City evening. Alejandro watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in months: hope. The year passed slowly and quickly all at once. Letters arrived regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes just monthly, but always honest. Isabella wrote about therapy, about the hard work of untangling performance from personality. She wrote about nightmares and breakthroughs, about learning to sit with herself without a mission to complete. She took a job teaching English to refugee children, finding purpose that wasn't about revenge. Alejandro wrote about the memorial project, about the families he met who'd spent decades not knowing what happened to their loved ones. He wrote about discovering that giving people closure felt better than any academic achievement. He wrote about missing her, about looking forward to her letters, about slowly learning that love didn't have to be dramatic to be real. On November 2nd, 1 year after their first reunion, Alejandro returned to the Basilica. He arrived early, nervous, holding a book he'd published, The Scarlet Cross, A History of Power and Silence. The dedication read, "To Isabella Romano, who taught me that some mysteries are worth living through, not just solving." Isabella arrived exactly on time. Her hair cut shorter, her face open and uncertain but genuine. She saw the book in his hands and her eyes filled with tears. "You spelled my real name right this time." "I'm a good researcher," Alejandro grinned. Isabella took the book, running her fingers over the dedication. Then she looked up at him, and her smile was pure sunshine. "I spent the year figuring out who Isabella Romano is. Want to know what I learned?" "Tell me." "She's someone who loves history, but prefers making new memories. She's someone who believes in justice, but has learned that healing matters more than revenge. She's someone who was afraid of being ordinary, but discovered that ordinary can be beautiful." She stepped closer. "And she's someone who loves a stubborn historian who refused to give up on her when she couldn't even recognize herself." "And I," Alejandro said, taking her hand, "I'm done researching. I'm ready to live." "Good," Isabella said, "because I'm done hiding behind missions and roles and fear. I'm ready to just be with you." They walked out of the Basilica together into the bright Mexican afternoon. No secrets, no symbols, no sanctuary but each other. They didn't have all the answers. They hadn't fixed everything, but they had something better. Honesty, time, and the courage to build something real from the ruins of their complicated past. 6 months later, Isabella would joke that falling in love with Alejandro was the only undercover operation that lasted after her cover was blown. He'd laugh and correct her. "It's not an operation if both people know the truth." And she'd smile and kiss him and admit he was right. Because the most sacred thing they discovered in all those holy places wasn't hidden in ancient chambers or coded in secret documents. It was the simple, profound courage to be known completely and loved. Anyway, that was the real miracle. That was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. That was faith.